Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, April 10th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I keep coming back to these maps in every report because I find them very instructive on understanding where the pattern has been. Because as we try to diagnose on where it's going here for the rest of April and into May, I think we need to understand the persistence part of this pattern. So it's been a setup where things have been quite wet throughout the west, a lot of late season snow in the month of March. We've even seen a lot of additional snow here in the northern plains and upper Midwest. And there's just been this large region where each storm system has refused to kind of draw back moisture into. Part of it's because of the trajectory. These waves have come into the west and they've kind of made this movement, which just increases the rain shadow effect that's happening in parts of Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, and the western half of Oklahoma and Texas. Now, we did get some big storms over the weekend here on Sunday in this part of Texas, some hailers down here. But what I'm talking about is returning meaningful moisture. You go all around that and it's been extremely wet. About the only other places I'm really watching for are going to be in parts of the mid-Atlantic, which North Carolina all the way to eastern Texas. This area got a bunch of rain over the weekend, and then also down here into Florida. So we're just trying to identify what in the upcoming pattern might the configuration in the jet stream do to a map like this. Because we know that going into a growing season, it's all about subsurface soil moisture that needs to be in place in order to endure stretches of drier and hotter weather. Because those are going to happen every summer, no matter what. Okay, doesn't matter if it's El Niño or La Niña or neither. We're still going to have to be on the lookout for untimely heat and potential flat drought situation. That is not forecastable right now at this point in April. So that surface or subsurface soil moisture, let's look at a relative soil moisture map. This is available water in percent. And we're going between 10 and 40 centimeters. So this would be 4 to 16 inches. Now we can see where we've had some flooding going on, or flooding will be continuing. This whole region in through here has actually seen as of late adequate moisture, and then it's been extremely wet down farther to the south. Our drought areas in here, this still has snow sitting on top of it, and there's kind of an area in between that has some places seen moisture and other places have been drier. Now, I'm only doing this east of the Rocky Mountains. Come back west of the Rocky Mountains, it's an entirely different scenario because so much of the water is being supplied by the snow and it's melting and what it's going to do to get into the reservoirs. One of the big things we'll need to cover at the end of this, though, is what we might be seeing. Kind of the desert Southwest has two rainy seasons, one during the winter and then one in summer when they have the monsoon. We need to pay attention to that as well, okay? But thinking about this snow, take a look at the latest snow water equivalent map. Now, throughout the west, we've been covering this. We have a lot of water in the snow in the west. We'll take a look at the newest maps in a second. But a big focus for me this week is going to be on what happens as this very warm weather tries to move itself to the north. How quickly does this melt? And before I show it to you, I want to remind you of something. When we were talking about this back at the end of March, and even last week, the first week of April, there was a lot of discussion that it would take possibly the whole month of April to get the snow to really melt from this area around the Red River Valley of the North. I'm having to refine that a little bit because I'll be honest, I'm a bit not surprised, but I'm a bit amazed at how far to the north this very warm air is going to make it. So we're going to come back to that in a second. Some updates for the west. Here is the latest snow water equivalent map for the western United States. If you just kind of pause the video and take a closer look at this at full screen, you're going to still see numbers in that 200 to 300 to up to 400% range. And this extends throughout Oregon and Idaho along the Snake River Valley. I love this. This is an area that is still on the drought monitor here in Oregon where these reservoirs are going to get a better chance at refilling. Same thing for around the Snake River Valley. You come over here to the upper Colorado Basin, which is in this area, and we're still well above the last 10 years at 150% of normal snowpack right now. So that, again, is going to continue this narrative of probably having good flow in the Colorado River for most of this upcoming year. Okay, from here, what I want to show you, though, is the temperatures this afternoon. And let's get an update on this. This is 4:30 p.m. Central Time. So we saw 70s make it into South Dakota. We saw 70s make it actually into Montana. And this is prompting a very rapid melt. Where we still see the cooler air is where the snowpack is deepest, and we just cannot get the heating into the ground here because of the reflectivity of the snow, plus the sensible cooling of the atmosphere from the snow as well. But this is a pretty major shift in temperatures. We're going to be looking at how this is going to continue to change this week because what you notice is that right now, if I kind of just show you some satellite imagery, can you see the ridge that's opening? Let me just start you this morning and play forward. The ridge I'm talking about is in this cloud field right here. It's exposed how much snows throughout parts of the Intermountain West and Sierra Nevada. It's got most of the Pacific Northwest. I'm talking specifically about Oregon and Washington still in kind of enshrouded in clouds. But as I move this, you can see where that snow is, right? Can you see it? I'm talking right up here. And with the ridge building in and these temperatures starting to warm up, we're going to really see some melting of this very quickly. I was watching this afternoon storms building right into this part, like Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and some storms down here in Texas. And one of the things I'm concerned about is we have very clear skies over parts of the mid-Atlantic, and that's going to give us another risk tomorrow morning on a frost event. In fact, you can see right now where they've got the frost advisory out for parts of North, South Carolina, and Virginia, just because clear skies, calm winds, those winds are actually coming a bit out of the north and east, are going to give us, that risk of a frost. Now, this shade of color you see here and here, this is all hydrologic outlook from NOAA, and they're talking about the rate of melt and what that could be doing to flooding in this area. But we've got very strong winds coming in tomorrow here. This would be Tuesday, and also right in through here on Tuesday. And by the way, we still see, this has been around all day, there's an avalanche warning for this part of Utah. So on Tuesday, this is what the winds are going to look like. There's a low that's up here coming out of Alberta. Strong winds coming through Montana, but running around this large high. This is the high that's promoting the risk of the frost event in the Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas. Well, on the backside, there's always warm air advection. And unfortunately, this air is very dry, as we saw at the beginning of this, which is why they've got red flag warnings out for Colorado, parts of Kansas, Nebraska, western Iowa, and southern parts of South Dakota. So these are the winds that are prompting that outlook. Let's stay on this temperature discussion, though, and I want to show you what Tuesday's high temperatures are expected right now from the National Digital Forecast database. What I see here is that we're going to have 90s possible in parts of Nebraska, maybe creeping in on South Dakota. Now, will we break fully into the 90s? I'm just saying it's hot. That's 30 to some places almost 40 degrees warmer than normal. It's warmer here than it is in Florida tomorrow. But watch as we go from Tuesday into Wednesday. Colder air comes into Montana. So remind you that today was hot in Montana. On Monday, another hot one on Tuesday, but then a 30-degree swing in temperatures. But the warmth stays throughout the western core belt to the upper Midwest, and this is really going to work hard on melting that snowpack. Here's Thursday's temperatures getting into Friday. And again, what we're watching late this week is a system, I'll show it to you in more detail in a few moments, that could finally make it through the Rocky Mountains after going through the Cascades, come out of Colorado, and run in this direction. I've got very good news, though, in the latest forecast trends for snow in this area. I was worried about it this morning, saw the noon runs, and I think we've got a better chance of avoiding it. But this is Friday's temperatures getting into Saturday, and then into Sunday. A cool shot comes in. But you notice how it's already starting to warm up in the west? There's a lot of evidence that this pattern is open and moving and not blocked. And I'll come back to that point in a few moments because honestly, after spending some time talking to my colleagues Matt Reardon and Andrew Pritchard today, I would have to tell you that right now my forecasting strategy is more about finding what isn't there versus what is. And I'll explain that in a few moments. Next, let's look at these new maps looking at how many GDDs are expected over the next 7 days. So you saw the heat coming in. This is using the corn formula, so base of 50, max of 86. And I just want to point out what we talked about this morning. We aren't expecting the temperatures to make a massive rebound right along the Red River. But just notice that you go south of there down to Omaha, and the difference is 100 GDDs. There's a lot of folks planting right now. And the speed at which this crop gets established is going to be very sensitive to emergence and then the risk of a frost event, right? So that has got to be top of priority for me. That and what kind of moisture is going to be continue to return to this area. I'm talking about this broad area of the Midwest and the central United States in terms of getting this crop a good drink. Same thing is applying down south where we're continuing to plant cotton. Of course, we're getting other crops established here and getting some areas that needed to be replanted. So the Precip quick hit on this looks like this for the next 7 days. Everywhere that you see these colors that's representing an area that's going to be drier. So we have systems coming into the northwest. We have the system that's going to eject out of Colorado late this week, really more into the weekend, which is going to have some snow on the northern side of it. But you'll see the changes in a few moments. This will produce some isolated storms that will run through the Midwest and Mid-South, but overall not wetter than normal. And then we're going to watch for this, before all of that happens, storms to creep up here later this week in parts of the Southeast. Problem with this pattern is not a whole lot of incentive in the atmosphere to return moisture to the driest parts of the country. Okay. With that though, I'm sorry I'm bouncing around here, but I'm trying to stitch this piece, this weather piece together for you in time. As that system I mentioned goes through, out ahead of it, a whole lot of warm air. This is every 6 hours from today's 12Z European model, and you can see how warm things are going to continue to get through Wednesday and beyond. But the system that rolls out here comes through on Friday into Saturday. And what you notice is that, for example, Sunday morning, we've got a lot of cold air replacing that warm air that we're going to see earlier this week. So this hard contour here represents a 32-degree isotherm. So Sunday getting into Monday morning and then into Tuesday morning, that's where we're seeing the coldest air being. So what is important about this is that the previous runs had brought the sub-freezing temperatures down as far as I'm drawing these arrows, and the newest forecast does not. So it's more mild. We need to continue to watch for that trend specifically. And what I think is really important about this pattern and why this was unable to just drive all that colder air farther to the south is the pattern is open and moving and not cutting off lows. So this is the what isn't happening part of it, okay? As I just show you the upper level height pattern centered on North America through the rest of this week, here's a couple things to see. We have another deep trough coming into the west. That's what's cooling things down in the west once we get past Tuesday. We see the ridge opening up east. That's what's helping keeping all the warmer air, for the most part, east of about the 100th meridian. But it gets underneath it a low that kind of gets trapped, but not truly connected to cold air. So this upper level low that is tucked underneath this high is what draws up moisture later this week into the southeast. Now watch. As we go from Friday into the weekend, this is the system that rolls through this weekend and pulls right over the Great Lakes. Now, what I always worry about this time of year, in fact, from now all the way through mid-May, is for one of these systems to get cut off and sit here and spin, keeping a bunch of cold air in place. If it does that, then we have an extended time period of colder conditions and a better chance at bringing the colder air farther to the south. I'm talking about a frost risk here. But what we end up getting is low pressure here with several spokes off of it. In fact, you could probably count 6, maybe 7. So this is a pretty high wave number, which means that the pattern's going to stay open and progressive and moving, meaning it's going to go east. So instead of that sitting here for a week, it moves and another ridge opens back up. But what I noticed in this pattern is that it has a tendency to want to continue to drive troughs here. Okay? And I've been scratching my head trying to figure out why that's the case. And I've attributed it to the MJO going to phase 7. I've attributed it to shifts overall in the North Pacific and North Atlantic. And I think I have one more thing to attribute this to, and I hope I'm not doing any of this attribution in error, all right? So sit tight. I want to come back to why I think the pattern keeps returning to this. First, let's come back to that temperature discussion. We've seen that the next 5 days are very mild in through here, and the cutoff low over the south is what's keeping it cool. That's a snow feedback, and here are more of those persistent troughs coming into the northwest. So let's let this slide forward. Because the pattern is open and moving, we do expect the colder air to come in behind that system. So early next week, there's colder air moving in here, and the west is going to get a brief warm-up. But then as we go past that, now out to about April 21st, this is the 5 days leading up to the 22nd, what happens? Well, things progress, warm air begins to move back in, and we lose the strongly anomalous temperature pattern getting out here to the end of April. And when I see this, I start to look for patterns. I say, all right, do we end up keeping more troughs here? Do we have ridging in the midsection of the country? Maybe some weaker troughing over the eastern Corn Belt getting into the Appalachian Mountains? And is this all due to snow-cooled air? That makes sense with this pattern, but it seems to continue to be getting set up with this. And that's what I want to know more about. So I want to remind you of something. On our website, agweather.com, if you're in the ground and you're planting right now, don't forget that you can go in here and at any moment get these point forecasts. So my family lives in Rochester. They live in Rochester, Illinois. It's a small town outside of Springfield. So I'm going to click on it. I want to show you what their forecast looks like and a way to use this. So you land on it, you get all these statistics up at the top. In fact, Rochester's expected to get 90 GDDs over the next 10 days, and they're going to be 14 degrees warmer than average. All right, you can see all the Precip stats up here. But remember, when you slide down here to the bottom after looking at your 7-day panel, I'm curious, is Rochester going to get another frost? So I'm going to click on the 10-day multi-model temperatures. And what I'm watching for is for any of the models, the National Blend, the GFS, the European model, to drop a temperature back down into this frost zone. And I was concerned about next Monday morning or next Tuesday morning. And we don't see them. They're going to be in the upper 30s, but no risk of a frost right now. So use this, because you can also come in here and take a look at your soil temperatures and see if they're going to be able to stay above that 50-degree mark. There's going to be that shot at some cooler air in through here, but we're going to rebound pretty quickly. So please take advantage of this. Now, that's the near-term tool. Remember, why do we keep seeing the cooler weather back here? I'm still trying to answer that question. Thinking about it, I'm going to take you to ocean temperatures right now. Now, we know we've had this long discussion about how quickly El Niño's coming back, and we're going to look at that again at the end of this video. But I've noticed that throughout March, and many of us have been talking about this, that the cooler water off the west has been sticking around. Now, that cooler water off the west is a part of something called the negative phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And we need to know, if it stays cool there in April and May, what does that typically do to the pattern? So I'll show it to you here. I went into this tool from NOAA, and I said, show me April and May temperature patterns correlated with the PDO. And you get this figure. Now, we know that the PDO is in its negative phase right now, which means you have to flip the color bar in your head. These colors are cooler risks, and these are warmer. And did you notice that the models are trying to open this area back up to warmth while keeping the western United States cool and possibly New England near average or cooler? So I think that this is the newest thing I want to attribute the pattern to. I think the MJO is working in concert with this. And that's probably why we see this forecast from the CPC today. See where they've got mild, cooler, cooler? And their longer term outlook, which they'll update later this week, says, well, at some point we bust out into more mild conditions here. But why do we see the cooler weather? Well, if there's cold water along the west coast, you can get sensible cooling. You'll get troughs that dip through there, and they've got to run up over something. And if there's ridging in here, well, it may possibly be drier more often than not in this area. And that is not what I had been forecasting. I had been forecasting tighter windows for this area through April into May. But we got to watch it to see if that actually manifests itself, all right? So let's add to it another piece. This is from the CFSV2. This is their week 1 forecast of temperatures. We've seen that. Here's week 2. Now you notice there's a bit of a fluctuation. The pattern's open and moving. So bring in some cooler weather here into week 2. It'll soon be replaced by the time you get into week 3, which opens it back up warm. But you notice by the time we start May, according to the CFSV2, there's another round of cooler weather coming in here. I can attribute this to the open pattern and the cooler weather that's happening here. So it's just up, down, up, down. And probably some of you are listening to this going, yes, Snodgrass, it's spring. That's what we get. But I'm concerned about the pace at which folks are going here and if there's any frost risk in this. What you don't want to see, and I'll just draw over this, if you are in the Midwest, Plains, Mid-South, Northeast, we just don't want to see a low getting snapped off of the flow and left to sit and spin right around Lake Superior or over toward Lake Ontario. That's what I don't want. That would just deliver the cold from the Canadian Prairie through the mid part of the country. That's not this, by the way. That's not what we're seeing here. But we need to add to this another part to the discussion because the newest European model, look, troughs possibly here, open up ridges there, cooler in this area. Now, does that not look exactly like what we said it could look like if we, there it is, if the PDO is the most dominant signal? Remember, reverse those colors. So cooler, warmer, cooler. I think that's what the models have bit into. And I'm just going to tell you something. The PDO is a background state to the flow. I think that we will see a pretty volatile pattern. What I mean by volatile is not settled. Let me rephrase that. An unsettled pattern. And it's going to open and close and open and close with warmth, followed by a shot of cooler air, warmth, cooler air. It's going to transition. I don't think the rest of April into May is going to get stuck in any one configuration. And maybe some supporting evidence for that is when you go look at the latest precipitation forecast for April 20 to May 20, you notice how it's now got a different look than it did when I showed it to you last week. This same time period last week looked like this. And now it's gone to that. And this is just an example of where the spring transitional time period really reduces our predictability. To be honest, the most predictable times of year are when we're fully engaged in winter or fully engaged in summer, not the transition months of fall and spring. So could we tighten the windows back up here at some point? Sure. They're not tight right now, but they could open up. One thing I don't see happening, and I do agree with the Climate Prediction Center on this, is that unfortunately, the seasonal outlook they released back at the very end of March on keeping this area dry, even though the models want to put moisture into that area, they keep failing to do so. It's out there in the 2-week outlook, but then by the time you get to that actual time frame, the moisture's not there. I need to see a different look with a stronger subtropical component to the jet to make that happen. So let me give this to you one last way before we just transition away from this. Can I take you down to an equatorial view and show you what's going on with the upper level winds at the jet stream level? This is where I really say we are going to look for the isn't there versus is there. Do you notice the jet stream is retracted? It's back over here. But what isn't here? Split flow isn't here. What isn't here? Big blocking ridges or deep elongated troughs. So what I see here is just a spring pattern. And that's it. I just see good spring weather, maybe enhanced a bit, complements of this developing El Niño with a little bit of a subtropical component. We like that. Get in a subtropical component of the jet. That helps keep more warmth across the U.S. and Canadian prairie when it does warm up. So that's my case right now. And if some of you are scratching your heads with me, that's good. We both are under the same impression that we're going to be living within a 10-day time period on our forecasting, not being able to clearly see what's going to happen in week 3, week 4, and week 5 and 6. It's just, I have a feeling this is where we are. And it's important, I think, for me just to admit that to you. So what are we watching? All right, I'm watching this right now. There's a trough that's in the Gulf of Alaska. We've been talking about these guys. There's also, coming around the base of this trough of the Aleutian Islands, a little jet streak here. And it would appear that these two are going to work together to come into the Pacific Northwest late this week and barrel through the ridge that's in place where all of this warmth is currently sitting in the midsection of the country. And that's going to kick off a system. Best way to look at that is to compare the GFS 12Z run to the European run. So here's the storms we were watching this afternoon. Those were initialized well in the European. As we play into Tuesday morning, Tuesday midday, and Tuesday evening, there's a system, that first trough coming into the northwest. So snow for the Cascades, snow for the Northern Rockies, but relatively higher elevation. Now what is important about Tuesday is that the ridge of high pressure, which is keeping the southeast up to the mid-Atlantic cool, is also opening this whole area up to warmth and eventually some moisture transport. Not initially, it's too dry right now, but later in the week. So as we play this forward, this is now getting into Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon and evening. Then we get into Thursday morning, afternoon and evening. What we're going to watch at this point is snow coming out into Montana, possibly into parts of North Dakota. It's in both models. But what's going on here is there's a trough here and a large ridge that's breaking around a cutoff low over the southeast. And that's what's delivering the showers and storms over the southeast. Right now, I don't see there being a severe threat to it, but 1 to 3 inches of rain is possible out of this. Okay, now this lead wave comes through here Thursday. This is now getting into Friday. And it leaves this elongated pressure trough. So there's a low to the north that's going in this direction. And there's another low associated with that second wave, okay, that's coming in here, coming out of parts of Colorado. And it's going to ride the front. So going from Friday afternoon into the evening, coming up here onto Saturday morning and Saturday midday, the most important thing I saw to this is that that will sweep through this area, bringing a front and some storms. But the models really backed off on the snow and its extent. The GFS still trying to hit northern Minnesota with snow, but earlier today, the GFS was trying to hit this whole area with a lot of snow. Much different scenario, much more mild, less snow. That front goes through, and then you know what the recipe is. The trough delivers the colder air for Monday and Tuesday, and then the whole thing resets. There's another trough coming into the northwest. Warmth spreads out ahead of it, and we're going to watch for it to eventually make it here. But it's about 5 days spacing between each one of these events, maybe a little bit more than that. So, since I mentioned the snow, let's take a look at it here. European model, 12Z run, total snow. There's the first system coming in this week, snow in the Cascades and Northern Rockies. And remember, as the first of those two lows comes out into Montana, possibly 3 to 5 inches of snow out of this late this week. But the second pulse, which was going to put down some snow in Colorado and possibly into North, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the European model shoves all that snow here. So here's the 7-day outlook of total snow from the European, and here's the GFS. There's some better agreement with this than this morning, except in northern Minnesota. All right, probability maps. This is the probability of getting at least 3 inches of snow through the next 10 days. All right, as we look at it, there we go. And there's the second big piece. On the Precip side of this, here's the chances of getting more than an inch in the next 10 days. And that's why we identified this area as being wettest in the Pacific Northwest, specifically coastal Oregon and Washington being the wettest. But we want to know if these windows are going to stay open for a lot of folks. So this map shows you over the next 10 days the probability of getting less than half of an inch. Now, this area needs the moisture. This area wants to leave it alone. Same with here. So this means there's a 50 to 60% chance of not seeing a half inch out of this. It's just those storms this Saturday coming through here. And since the snow's moved farther to the north, that actually helps this whole area out with continuing to try to melt that snow. From here, what about week 2? Well, if troughs keep reforming in the west, we keep coastal Oregon and Washington wet. But with systems relatively weak overall, we see there's a broader area that's near normal to drier than normal. The GFS has been the real culprit in trying to just give moisture to places that need it and not actually delivering in the longer term. I'm talking about this. The week 2 forecast from the GFS wants to just pull that moisture into this area. And every time it's done this, by the time we get to that time frame, it's not there. So this is the 17th through the 24th. And I'm just going to have to continue to put big question marks on it to see if it'll actually manifest itself, because it's not there in the European model right now. But this is wetter in the west. Well, the northwest. Still seeing windows opening up here. All right, let's finish this up. El Niño. Latest data just released from the National Multi-Model Ensemble looks just like the European. Losing the negative PDO, building El Niño, building positive Indian Ocean dipole. If the model is going to be internally consistent with itself, what it will have to do is give you this precipitation outlook. I showed you last week the new European model. This is the newest NMME. And you can almost see the same places that are wet in both models. What are some of the differences? Well, Canadian Prairie, Northern Plains, notice that the NMME is a little drier in through here. Not much. Bigger differences right here in the Carolinas. And this is still a bit of a mystery for me, what's going on here. But overall, we could look at this and say this is pretty typical of an El Niño summer. And what an El Niño summer typically does, watch this, is you end up getting split flow in the west, flow that comes out of the northwest in the midsection of the country, and a Bermuda high that sits here that the jet stream bounces around. And that's what keeps this area wet, a weak southwestern monsoon, scattered storm systems that roll through the country in this direction. And because of that, the heat risk, which is not shown in this map, but the heat risk kind of runs this area. That's where we tend to see it highest. To prove that to you, I went back and just reconstructed, when it's May to September, what the height pattern looks like. There's the ridge, there's the trough, there's a trough, the flow goes around it and bumps over the subtropical ridge. That's called the Bermuda High. That's where I got that from. And here's what we've got for the low-level pressure. So you notice here, the Bermuda High may slide a bit farther to the south in its extent. This is what helps suppress the hurricane season coming across the Atlantic Ocean. So this is our bigger picture for where we're taking this pattern going into summer, assuming that El Niño will be a dominant factor at that point. It's the only assumption we can make right now, given that that's what the ocean temperatures are currently advertising. Last thing to talk about, South America. This narrative hasn't changed too much. Next 10 days, above normal rains on the safrinha crop. It's drier in pockets of southern Brazil and along the southern 2/3 of the Paraná River, including Uruguay. That's an area that has been in drought for most of this season. So we're expecting to see safrinha crop numbers continue to come up in Brazil, but full season crops in Argentina continue to suffer under this drought. We are also seeing a lot of cooler weather forecast in this area for the next 10 days. So I'm going to stop it here and just keep this narrative going with all of us here over the coming weeks and months, but hopefully you found this informative and useful. We'll talk soon. Thanks.